The delivery room was still when Michael Brown placed the divorce papers on the metal tray inches from Jessica Brown's trembling hand. The monitors were steady. The baby had just cried. Nurses froze. His mother stood nearby, silent but approving. Michael spoke calmly, as if timing made it reasonable. As if pain could wait its turn, Jessica did not argue. She did not beg. She did not ask why. No one noticed the lawyer waiting outside the door. No one realized the documents Michael trusted were already irrelevant. Within minutes, power would change hands, not loudly, not cruelly, but permanently. Before the story unfolds, stay with us. If you believe dignity matters, even in moments of deepest vulnerability, don't miss what comes next. Tell us where you're watching from in your local time. This story travels differently across places. And if quiet strength and legal truth resonate with you, consider subscribing to follow stories that let actions speak for themselves. Jessica Brown had learned early that silence was not weakness. It was space. Space to observe, to remember, to prepare. Long before the delivery room, long before the papers, Michael would one day place in front of her, Jessica had lived a life defined by restraint. She was not raised to announce herself. She was raised to finish what she started and to leave no loose ends. In college, professors remembered her not for loud opinions, but for questions that landed precisely where others had overlooked a detail. In her professional life, colleagues knew her as reliable, almost invisible, until deadlines were met. Flawlessly, contracts were airtight, and projects concluded without drama. Michael Brown had mistaken that quiet for dependence. They met in their early 30s in a context that felt ordinary enough to be safe. Michael worked in commercial real estate finance. He spoke confidently, dressed sharply, and carried himself like someone accustomed to being listened to. On their first dates, he talked about growth leverage strategy. Jessica listened. She asked careful questions. He liked that. It made him feel respected. What Michael never asked about was her family. Jessica's background was American in the most unremarkable way on the surface. Suburban childhood, private but not flashy schools. No public displays of wealth, no visible inheritance. What existed beneath that surface was something her parents had taught her never to discuss casually: structure. Legal structure, generational planning, trusts designed not to impress but to endure. Her father had once told her calmly that money was loud only when it was insecure. So when Michael assumed she earned less, saved less, understood less, Jessica did not correct him. She did not see the point. Their marriage began without fireworks. That was what made it comfortable. Michael paid the mortgage. Jessica contributed quietly, transferring money without commentary, never questioning his sense of control. Linda Brown, Michael's mother, took this as confirmation of her assumptions. To Linda, Jessica was polite, soft-spoken, and therefore manageable. A good wife, so long as she stayed in her place. Jessica noticed everything. She noticed how Linda's tone shifted whenever finances were discussed. How Michael's voice hardened when he felt challenged. How small comments, "I handle the important stuff," or "you don't need to worry about that," were repeated often enough to become a philosophy. Jessica did not argue. She wrote things down, not emotionally, practically. She kept records because that was how she lived. Emails were archived. Bank notifications were saved. Conversations that happened in hallways or cars were summarized later in neat dated notes. This was not fear. It was habit. She had been taught that clarity came later, not in the moment. When she became pregnant, the dynamic shifted almost immediately. Michael was pleased at first, proud, in a way that was performative. He announced the pregnancy to his family before Jessica had finished telling her closest friend. Linda stepped in decisively, offering opinions on doctors, hospitals, birth plans. Jessica listened. She did not push back, not because she agreed, but because she was learning. Pregnancy was harder than Jessica expected. Not dramatically so, but persistently. Fatigue that never lifted, appointments that multiplied. nights when she lay awake, one hand on her stomach, feeling the quiet insistence of a life forming inside her. Michael's presence during this time was inconsistent. He claimed work pressure, travel, deals that required his full attention. Jessica did not accuse him of anything. She adjusted. It was during this period that the emails from the bank became more frequent. At first, they seemed routine. Notifications about account activity, transfers between internal accounts. Jessica noticed them only because she noticed everything. The amounts grew larger, the timing more erratic. When she asked Michael casually about one transfer, he brushed it off. Business stuff. You don't need to worry. She didn't, but she documented it. Around the same time, Jessica made a call she had been postponing for years. Daniel Wright had been her family's attorney since before she could legally sign her own name. Their conversations were never emotional. They were procedural. When she told him she was pregnant, his response was simple. Then it's time to update everything. They spoke in careful language, about protections, about contingencies, about what happened if circumstances changed suddenly. Jessica did not mention divorce. She did not accuse Michael of anything. Daniel did not ask her why she sounded so composed. Paperwork was prepared quietly. Signatures were obtained without urgency. Jessica did not feel powerful doing this. She felt responsible. By the final trimester, the distance between her and Michael had become something neither of them acknowledged aloud. He stayed out later. He answered calls in other rooms. Linda visited more often, inspecting the house, commenting on expenses, hinting at what would happen if things ever went wrong. Jessica nodded. She took notes afterward. At night, when the house was quiet, Jessica sometimes placed a hand over her stomach and thought about the kind of world her child would enter. She did not imagine confrontation. She imagined safety, stability, a life not subject to someone else's temper or assumptions. She did not know when Michael decided to end the marriage. She only knew that when he did, he believed the timing would protect him. And that belief, she understood even then, was his first mistake. Michael Brown had always believed that order came from authority, from someone deciding firmly how things would run and expecting others to adapt. In his mind, that someone had always been him. He liked to think of himself as reasonable, fair even. He worked long hours. He carried the stress of numbers most people never saw. Risk, leverage, timing, these were the words that filled his days. When he came home tired and distracted, he told himself it was because he was providing. When Jessica stayed quiet, he assumed she understood that arrangement. What he never considered was that understanding did not equal agreement. Michael's confidence had been reinforced by years of small, unchallenged victories. He chose the house. He chose the accounts. He chose which expenses were discussed and which were simply decided. Jessica never argued. She transferred money when asked. She signed documents he placed in front of her without ceremony. To Michael, this confirmed his belief that she trusted him completely. Linda Brown reinforced that belief whenever she visited. She spoke openly in front of Jessica, never lowering her voice. "A man needs to feel respected in his own home," she would say, looking directly at her son. Too many women forget that. Jessica would pour coffee listening without expression. Linda interpreted this as compliance. Michael interpreted it as success. As Jessica's pregnancy progressed, Michael felt the weight of responsibility shift in a way he didn't enjoy. A child meant permanence. It meant obligations that could not be deferred or negotiated. At work, he had begun to feel pressure from decisions he had made months earlier, investments that required more liquidity than he had anticipated. He moved money between accounts, more often telling himself it was temporary, strategic. He did not tell Jessica. When he noticed that she received the same bank notifications he did, he dismissed the thought almost immediately. She wouldn't understand them, he assumed. And even if she did, she wouldn't question him. She never had before. In moments of irritation, Michael found himself resenting her quiet more than open disagreement. There was nothing to push against, no argument to win. just that calm, observant stillness. It made him uneasy in ways he couldn't articulate. Linda noticed the change in him before Jessica did. "You've been distracted," Linda said one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table while Jessica rested in the other room. "Marriage changes things. Some women forget their place once there's a child involved." Michael frowned. "Jessica's not like that." Linda smiled thinly. "You think that because she hasn't tested you yet." The idea lodged itself in his mind. What if Jessica did decide to push back? What if she began asking questions about money, about control? The thought irritated him more than it should have. That was when the idea of divorce first surfaced, not as an emotional reaction, but as a contingency, a way to reassert order. Michael spoke to Ethan Carter under the guise of curiosity. Hypothetical questions. What would happen if things didn't work out? How assets would be divided? What leverage he might have? Ethan answered confidently. Based on what Michael described, the situation seemed straightforward. Most assets were in Michael's name. Jessica's income appeared modest. The law, Ethan explained, rewarded preparation. Michael took that as reassurance. He began to imagine the timing. After the birth, perhaps. When emotions were high and Jessica would be too exhausted to resist. He told himself this was pragmatic, not cruel. Better to act decisively than let things drag on. What he didn't tell Ethan, what he didn't tell himself, was that Jessica had never once asked him for reassurance. Never asked for security. Never demanded explanations. She seemed to accept everything. Michael mistook that acceptance for surrender. As the weeks passed, his interactions with Jessica became more clipped. He spoke to her like someone managing a situation rather than sharing a life. Instructions replaced conversations. When she asked how his day had been, he answered briefly, distracted. When she mentioned an upcoming appointment, he barely looked up. Jessica noticed. She adjusted. Linda became more present as the due date approached. She criticized the hospital choice, the doctor, the plan Jessica had quietly arranged. "You're too passive," she told her one afternoon. "A woman needs to be firm if she wants respect." Jessica smiled politely. She did not explain that firmness came in many forms. In private moments, Michael rehearsed the speech he would give. Calm, controlled. He imagined explaining that the marriage wasn't working, that this was best for everyone. He imagined Jessica crying, perhaps pleading. He imagined himself remaining composed. In those imaginings, he always emerged as the rational one. What he never imagined was being interrupted. The delivery date arrived sooner than expected. The hospital called while Michael was in a meeting. He arrived flustered, irritated that the timing wasn't ideal. Even then, he told himself that decisive action would simplify things. One clean break, no ambiguity. Jessica labored quietly. She did not call out for him when the pain intensified. She followed instructions. She focused inward. Michael watched from a distance, his mind already moving ahead to what would come next. When the baby was finally born healthy and crying, Michael felt a brief surge of relief. It passed quickly. He looked at Jessica, exhausted, pale, silent, and felt certain she would not have the strength to argue. He reached into his bag. The papers were ready. Everything was prepared. Ethan had assured him the plan was solid. Linda waited outside, confident. Michael believed he was in control. He did not see the flaw in that belief until much later. Pregnancy did not soften Jessica Brown. It refined her. The physical strain was constant but predictable. What unsettled her more was the way absence settled into the marriage like a habit no one questioned. Michael's nights grew longer. His calls grew shorter. When he was home, he seemed elsewhere. Eyes on a screen, thoughts already moving ahead. Jessica did not confront him. She measured the distance the way she measured everything else, carefully, without panic. Her doctor visits became milestones of quiet competence. She learned the language of numbers, weeks' measurements, margins of error. She listened to Dr. Helen Moore explain risks and procedures, nodding, asking only what was necessary. The medical file grew thicker. Jessica kept copies of everything not because she mistrusted the system, but because she trusted documentation. Linda Brown appeared more often as the due date approached. She brought lists, opinions, warnings framed as concern. She questioned Jessica's choices with the practiced ease of someone used to being obeyed. "You don't want to make things difficult," she said, at once sitting at the edge of the bed, as if she owned the room. "Michael has enough pressure." Jessica looked at her calmly. "I'm not making things difficult," she replied. It was not a defense. It was a statement of fact. Linda did not like that answer. Michael's irritation became more visible when Linda was around. He deferred to his mother in small ways, letting her answer questions meant for him, allowing her to override Jessica's preferences. Jessica noticed how this relieved him. Responsibility once shared had been reassigned. At night, when the house was quiet, Jessica returned to her records. Emails first, then bank notifications. She noticed patterns now that she had time to look closely. Transfers clustered around certain dates, amounts that were moved out and replaced days later. Accounts she recognized, and others she did not. When she asked Michael about one transfer again, weeks after the first time, his reaction was sharper. "I said it's work," he snapped. "Why are you suddenly so concerned?" Jessica paused. "I wasn't concerned," she said. "I was asking." Michael waved the question away, already irritated with himself for engaging. He did not notice Jessica's eyes lingering on his phone screen afterward. He did not see her open her notebook later and write a single line, dated and precise. She did not feel anger then. She felt confirmation. The call with Daniel Wright happened on a Tuesday afternoon while Michael was out. Jessica spoke from the small study door, closed voice steady. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When she described the pregnancy, the accounts, the changes in behavior, he did not react emotionally. "Preparation is not accusation," he said finally. "It's prudence." They discussed updates, beneficiary designations, medical proxies. Jessica asked what would happen if she were incapacitated during delivery. Daniel answered plainly. He explained the layers of protection already in place and the few that still needed signatures. None of it was dramatic. All of it was deliberate. When the documents arrived by courier 2 days later, Jessica signed them without ceremony. She did not reread what she already understood. She did not feel relief. She felt alignment, her actions matching the reality she was observing. Michael noticed none of this. He was too occupied with his own calculations. Pressure at work intensified. Deals he had counted on stalled. Liquidity tightened. He moved money again, telling himself he would replace it once things stabilized. The idea that someone might be tracking these movements did not cross his mind. Jessica had never given him reason to think she would. Linda's commentary grew sharper as the birth approached. She spoke openly about custody, about what made sense if a marriage failed. "Children need stability," she said pointedly. "And that usually means staying with the parent who can provide." Jessica listened. She filed the statement away with the others. One evening, as Jessica prepared her hospital bag, Michael watched from the doorway, detached. He asked perfunctory questions. She answered them. When she mentioned the name of the attorney who would be on call during delivery, framed as a routine precaution, Michael barely looked up. "Why would we need a lawyer at a hospital?" he asked. "For paperwork," Jessica replied. "Just in case." Michael scoffed lightly. "You worry too much." Jessica did not correct him. The night before she went into labor, Jessica lay awake listening to Michael's breathing beside her. She thought about the years she had spent accommodating his assumptions. She did not regret them. They had taught her something important. People revealed themselves most clearly when they believed no one was watching. In the early hours of the morning, the contractions began. They were measured at first, then insistent. Jessica woke Michael quietly. He groaned, checked the time, muttered something about meetings he would have to cancel. She waited patiently while he dressed. At the hospital, the process unfolded efficiently. Nurses moved with practiced calm. Dr. Moore reviewed charts, confirmed details. Michael paced. Linda arrived shortly after, carrying a sense of entitlement that clashed with the sterile order of the ward. Jessica labored without complaint. Pain came in waves, and she rode them inward, focusing on breath and rhythm. She did not look to Michael for reassurance. She did not ask Linda to leave. She conserved her energy. As hours passed, Michael grew restless. He checked his phone repeatedly. He stepped out to take calls. When he returned, his jaw was set, his posture decisive. Jessica noticed, but she was beyond speculation now. The present demanded everything. When the final stage began, Michael stood back, arms crossed. Linda hovered. Dr. Moore spoke calmly, guiding Jessica through the last effort. The baby arrived with a cry that filled the room, sharp and undeniable. Jessica felt the weight lift from her body and the weight settle into her arms. She closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the reality of new life. Around her, the room buzzed with quiet efficiency. Michael watched the scene with a sense of finality. He reached into his bag, feeling the smooth edge of the envelope he had prepared days earlier. Everything was aligned, he told himself. Timing witnesses leverage. Jessica opened her eyes. She did not know exactly when Michael would choose to act. She only knew that when he did, she would be ready. And that knowledge steadied her more than any reassurance could. The divorce papers were prepared long before Jessica Brown ever set foot in the delivery room. Michael Brown had approached the task the same way he approached everything else in his life, with a belief that control came from acting first. He framed the decision as strategic rather than emotional, a preventative measure, a way to limit exposure. When he spoke to Ethan Carter, he avoided words like fear or resentment. He talked instead about timing, efficiency, and leverage. Ethan listened carefully, nodding as Michael laid out his version of the marriage. A quiet wife, limited financial contribution, assets largely controlled by the husband. From the information Michael provided, the legal picture appeared uncomplicated. Ethan explained the standard provisions, the likely outcomes. He emphasized documentation and witnesses. Michael left those meetings reassured. He told himself he was being merciful by waiting until after the birth. He told himself that Jessica would understand once emotions settled. He told himself that clarity, even when painful, was kinder than ambiguity. None of these explanations fully convinced him, but they were sufficient. The documents themselves were clinical. No accusations, no dramatic language. Just clean lines outlining separation, custody assumptions, asset division. Michael reviewed them multiple times, adjusting phrasing, ensuring nothing appeared overtly cruel. He wanted to appear reasonable, fair. What mattered most to him was timing. Ethan suggested serving the papers in a private setting, perhaps weeks after the birth. Michael disagreed. He wanted witnesses, neutral ones, medical staff, family, people who would see that he was calm, composed, in control. He imagined the room, the stillness after the baby's arrival, the way Jessica would be too tired to argue. Linda supported the idea immediately. "It's smart," she said when Michael explained. "She won't make a scene. She never does." Michael took that as confirmation. While he prepared, Jessica prepared too, but in ways Michael never considered. She noticed subtle changes in his behavior during the weeks leading up to the due date. His phone calls became more guarded. He stepped outside to take them. He asked pointed questions about hospital procedures, about who would be allowed in the room. Jessica answered honestly, without curiosity. She did not ask why he suddenly cared. When she told Daniel Wright that Michael had been asking about witnesses and documentation, Daniel paused. "Then it's likely he's preparing something," he said. Jessica absorbed this calmly. "I assumed as much." They reviewed contingencies. If Michael attempted to assert control during delivery, if documents were presented while she was medicated or exhausted. Daniel explained her rights clearly. He reminded her that no document signed under duress would hold legal weight. Jessica nodded. She had no intention of signing anything. The trust documents had already been updated. Beneficiaries confirmed. Powers of attorney finalized. Everything that could be prepared quietly had been. Michael, meanwhile, grew increasingly convinced of his own narrative. He rehearsed what he would say, not aloud but internally. He imagined explaining that the marriage had changed, that expectations were no longer aligned. He imagined himself calm and steady, while Jessica struggled to respond. He imagined her silence as defeat. He did not imagine her silence as something else entirely. The night before the scheduled induction, Michael reviewed the envelope one last time. He placed it carefully in his bag, alongside his phone and wallet. He felt a sense of relief, believing that whatever happened next would be manageable. Jessica noticed the envelope when he set the bag by the door. She did not ask about it. At the hospital, the environment was efficient, controlled. Forms were signed, IDs verified. Jessica answered questions clearly, even as contractions intensified. Michael stood nearby, checking his watch more often than necessary. Linda arrived with a sense of purpose, already positioning herself as an authority in the room. As labor progressed, Michael became more restless. He stepped out repeatedly, returning with an air of resolve. Jessica watched him without curiosity. Her focus remained inward. She conserved her strength. When the baby was finally born, the room shifted. Relief spread among the staff. The cry filled the space. For a brief moment, everything paused. Michael chose that moment. He reached into his bag and removed the envelope, placing it on the tray beside the bed. The sound was small but distinct. Metal against paper. He spoke calmly, explaining that this was necessary, that it was best to address things clearly. Jessica did not reach for the envelope. She looked at Michael steadily, her expression unreadable. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask him to stop. She did not look at Linda. The nurses exchanged glances. Dr. Moore paused, assessing the situation without comment. Michael continued outlining the terms as if delivering a presentation. He emphasized reasonableness. He emphasized fairness. He did not notice that Jessica's attention had shifted not to the papers, but to the door. Outside, Daniel Wright waited. He had been notified earlier that day. He had reviewed the situation carefully. He had brought with him everything necessary to respond, not emotionally, but legally. He did not feel urgency. He felt precision. Inside the room, Michael finished speaking and waited for a reaction. Jessica said nothing. That silence unsettled him more than any protest could have. He mistook it for shock, for resignation. He allowed himself a small sense of victory. What Michael did not understand was that his preparation thorough, as he believed it to be rested on assumptions that had never been tested. Assumptions about power, about knowledge, about who had been paying attention. Jessica shifted slightly, adjusting her hold on the baby. She met Michael's gaze once more calmly, without anger. Then she looked toward the door. The envelope remained unopened. And for the first time since he began planning this moment, Michael felt something he could not control, a flicker of uncertainty, brief but unmistakable. The delivery room did not erupt into chaos. That was what made the moment unmistakable. Machines hummed softly. A nurse adjusted a monitor with practiced hands. Dr. Helen Moore spoke in a calm, professional tone as she finished the last checks. The baby, new warm and impossibly small, rested against Jessica Brown's chest. The weight was grounding. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, a reminder of how close life and vulnerability lived together. Michael Brown stood at the foot of the bed, posture straight, shoulders squared. He waited for the moment to settle, for the staff to step back just enough. He wanted witnesses, but not interruption. Linda Brown positioned herself near the wall, arms folded, chin lifted. Her presence was unmistakable, silent, supervisory. When Michael spoke, he kept his voice even. "Jessica," he said, as if beginning a routine conversation. "We need to address something." He slid the envelope closer. The metal tray made a soft sound as it shifted. Jessica glanced down, then back at him. Her expression did not change. She did not reach for the papers. She adjusted her hold on the baby instead, supporting the small head with careful precision. The nurses paused. One of them looked toward Dr. Moore, who gave a subtle nod, not of approval, but of assessment. This was not a medical emergency. It was something else, something they were not trained to manage. Michael continued explaining the terms, as though presenting a proposal. Separation, temporary custody arrangements, financial divisions he described as reasonable. He avoided words like fault or blame. He framed the decision as mutual necessity, even though no discussion had preceded it. Jessica listened. Her breathing was steady now. Pain had receded into a dull, manageable echo. Exhaustion remained, but it was the kind that clarified rather than blurred. She noticed details others missed, the way Michael avoided her eyes when mentioning custody, the way Linda's fingers tightened briefly when finances were mentioned. She noticed the nurse nearest the door shift her weight, uncertain. What Jessica did not feel was surprise. She had anticipated this moment in shape, if not in exact form. Timing, perhaps, was more aggressive than she had expected. But the intent was familiar. Michael was acting the way he always had, when he believed control was slipping by, formalizing it. Jessica, Michael prompted, mistaking her silence for disorientation. You need to acknowledge this. She looked at him, then really looked. Not with anger, not with hurt, with clarity. I don't need to do anything right now, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, not defiant, simply factual. Michael frowned. This needs to be addressed while we're all here. Why, she asked. The question was simple. It was not accusatory. It landed with more weight than any raised voice could have. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. Linda shifted, stepping forward slightly. Don't be difficult, she said. This is for the best. Jessica did not respond to Linda. She turned her attention back to the baby, tracing a finger gently along a tiny sleeve. The room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Moore cleared her throat. Mrs. Brown has just given birth, she said carefully. Any non-medical discussions can wait, Michael bristled. This won't take long. It already has. Dr. Moore replied, her tone neutral but firm. For the first time, Michael felt the room move against him. Not dramatically, subtly. The authority he assumed would be unquestioned was not absolute here. Medical protocol had its own hierarchy. Jessica sensed the shift. She used it. There's someone who should be here, she said, still calm. He's waiting. Michael's irritation sharpened. Who Jessica did not answer immediately. She looked toward the door, then back at Dr. Moore. May we have a moment? Dr. Moore nodded. She signaled to the nurses, who stepped back just enough to create space without leaving. Michael hesitated, then gestured impatiently. Fine, he said, but let's not drag this out. Jessica pressed the call button beside the bed. The door opened quietly moments later. Daniel Wright entered without ceremony. He wore a dark suit, unremarkable, except for how precisely it fit. He carried a slim folder under one arm. His expression was composed, professional, unreadable. He did not look at Michael first. He acknowledged. Dr. Moore nodded politely to the nurses, then turned to Jessica. Are you comfortable? He asked. Yes, Jessica replied. Only then did Daniel look at Michael. I'm Daniel Wright, he said evenly. I represent Jessica Brown. Michael stared at him, irritation giving way to confusion. Why is there a lawyer here? Daniel glanced at the envelope on the tray. It seems appropriate. Linda's eyes narrowed. This is unnecessary, she said sharply. Daniel smiled politely without warmth. That depends on perspective. Michael felt the first true crack in his certainty. Ethan should be handling this, he said. My attorney. Daniel nodded. Mr. Carter has been informed. He's on his way. The room grew very still. Jessica said nothing. She did not look at Michael. She did not look at Linda. She focused on the baby, on the slow rise and fall of a tiny chest. Daniel waited. He did not rush. He understood timing better than most. Michael attempted to regain control. This is ridiculous, he said. We can handle this privately. Daniel's voice remained calm. You chose to make it public. The words landed cleanly without accusation. Dr. Moore glanced at the clock. I'll give you 10 minutes, she said. Then we returned to medical care. Michael nodded stiffly. Daniel opened his folder, removing a document with deliberate care. Before any discussion of separation continues, he said there are matters that need to be clarified. Michael scoffed, like what Daniel did not answer immediately. He placed the document on the tray next to the envelope Michael had brought. 2 stacks of paper, similar in appearance, vastly different in consequence. Like standing, Daniel said finally, and authority. Jessica shifted slightly, adjusting her position so she could see both men. Her face remained composed. She felt no urge to speak. Everything that needed to be said would be said without her raising her voice. Michael glanced at the new document, then back at Daniel. "What is this?" Daniel met his gaze steadily. "That," he said, "is a trust deed." The words seemed to echo in the room. Linda's confidence faltered for the first time. "A trust," she repeated. What trust? Daniel did not look at her. One that predates this marriage. Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. "That doesn't matter," he said quickly. "We're married." Daniel nodded. "We were expecting that question." He turned to Jessica. "With your permission, I'll proceed." Jessica nodded once. The envelope Michael had placed so confidently on the tray remained unopened. The delivery room moments earlier, a place of exhaustion and new life, had become something else, entirely a space where assumptions were about to be tested, not through confrontation, but through procedure. Michael stood frozen, watching as Daniel prepared to speak. For the first time, he realized he had misjudged the room. No one raised their voice. That was the strangest part. The delivery room moments earlier, focused on the fragile immediacy of new life, now held a different kind of tension, quiet, procedural, deliberate. Daniel Wright stood beside the bed with the same composure he would have brought into a courtroom. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle before speaking. Before anything else, Daniel said evenly, "It's important to establish context." Michael Brown crossed his arms, an instinctive gesture of defense. "This isn't a courtroom." Daniel nodded. "Correct. Which is why clarity matters even more." Jessica Brown remained silent. She listened without looking at either man, her attention on the steady rhythm of her child's breathing. The baby slept unaware of the recalibration unfolding inches away. Daniel continued. "Jessica has just undergone a major medical event. Any documents presented to her at this time are at best unenforceable." He gestured briefly to the envelope Michael had brought. "That includes those." Michael bristled. "I wasn't asking her to sign anything, just to acknowledge." "Acknowledgement can be construed as consent," Daniel replied calmly. "Which is why I'm here." Linda Brown stepped forward. "This is inappropriate," she said sharply. "You're taking advantage of the situation." Daniel met her gaze without reaction. "I'm preventing that." The nurses exchanged glances. Dr. Moore remained near the door, observant but silent. She had seen conflict before, but rarely this restrained and rarely this precise. Michael felt his confidence slipping in increments so small that they were almost imperceptible. He had expected emotion, tears, pleading. Even anger would have been familiar. Instead, he was facing process. Ethan Carter arrived moments later, breath slightly hurried from the walk down the hall. He paused when he took in the scene. The 2 stacks of paper on the tray, Daniel's presence. Jessica's stillness. "What's going on?" Ethan asked. Daniel acknowledged him with a nod. "Mr. Carter." Michael turned toward Ethan, relief flickering briefly. "Tell him this is unnecessary." Ethan glanced at the envelope, then at Daniel's folder. He frowned. "What's that?" Daniel slid the top document toward him. "You'll want to review this." Ethan scanned the first page. His expression changed almost immediately, not dramatically, but unmistakably. He read more carefully, his brow furrowing as he took in the details. "This is..." He stopped choosing his word. "This is substantial." Michael felt irritation spike. "What are you talking about?" Ethan looked up slowly. "Michael, this is a trust deed." "I know what it is," Michael snapped. "It doesn't change anything." Ethan hesitated. "Actually, It might. Daniel spoke gently but firmly. The trust was established long before the marriage. Its assets are separate, completely. Linda's voice cut in sharp with disbelief. That's impossible. We would have known. Daniel shook his head slightly. Not necessarily. Jessica adjusted the blanket around her child, her movements slow and careful. She did not look at Linda. She did not need to. Michael felt heat rise in his chest. You're saying she's been hiding money? Daniel did not flinch. No, I'm saying she's been protected. The distinction landed heavily. Ethan continued reading, flipping to the next page. Michael, he said quietly, this changes standing. What standing? Michael demanded. Financial, legal, custodial. Ethan replied, each word measured. If this trust is valid, and it appears to be, it supersedes most of what we discussed. Michael turned back to Daniel, disbelief hardening into anger. This is manipulation. Daniel's tone remained even. Preparation. Jessica finally spoke. One word, she said softly. The room stilled further, all attention shifting to her. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Michael when she spoke. I never lied, she said. You never asked. Michael stared at her, searching for something, remorse perhaps, or apology. He found neither. What he found was calm. Linda shook her head, struggling to recalibrate. This is deceitful. Jessica looked at her, then not sharply, not angrily, just directly. You assumed, she said. That's not the same thing, Daniel resumed. The trust also includes provisions related to medical events and guardianship. Ethan's grip tightened on the document. This clause, he paused, this grants decision-making authority exclusively to Jessica. Yes, Daniel confirmed, including during and immediately after childbirth. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. So what are you saying? I'm saying. Daniel replied that any attempt to assert control over custody finances or decisions made today lacks legal foundation. The words were not an attack. They were a statement of fact. Michael looked at Ethan. You told me I told you based on the information you gave me, Ethan said quietly. This wasn't part of it. Silence stretched. The envelope on the tray sat untouched, its edges, crisp, its authority evaporating by the second. Michael felt exposed, not humiliated, but unmoored. The room was no longer aligned with his expectations. Dr. Moore stepped forward. We're nearing the end of the time I allotted, she said. Mrs. Brown needs rest. Daniel nodded. Of course. Michael took a step toward the bed, his voice lower now. Jessica, we can talk about this later. She looked at him, her expression unchanged. We are talking about it later, she said. Just not on your terms. That was the moment the shift completed, not loudly, not theatrically, but decisively. Michael stepped back, unsure where to stand. Linda retreated to the wall, her earlier certainty fractured. Ethan closed the folder slowly, understanding the implications more clearly now. Daniel gathered his documents with care. We'll proceed through proper channels, he said, as intended. Jessica leaned back slightly, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in defeat, but in relief. She had not raised her voice. She had not defended herself. She had allowed the truth to stand on its own. The delivery room returned gradually to its original purpose. A nurse adjusted a monitor. Dr. Moore gave quiet instructions. Life resumed its rhythm. Michael remained still, watching as the structure he believed he had built revealed its fault lines. The humiliation he had intended never arrived for Jessica. It settled instead silently around him. The lawyer outside the door had never intended to make an entrance. Daniel Wright believed that authority announced itself best when it did not need to be announced at all. He had waited in the hallway for hours, seated calmly reviewing documents he already knew by heart. Nurses passed him without comment. A security guard nodded once. No one questioned why he was there. He carried himself like someone who belonged. When Jessica pressed the call button, Daniel rose without urgency. He did not rush because there was nothing to outrun. Everything that mattered had already been decided on a paper. Inside the delivery room, the air had changed by the time he entered. It was denser, quieter, the kind of silence that followed miscalculation. Daniel took in the scene quickly. Jessica in the bed, pale, but composed, holding her child with instinctive care. Michael, standing stiffly at the foot of the bed, posture rigid, jaws set. Linda near the wall, arms folded tighter than before. Ethan Carter scanning documents with the growing awareness of a problem he had not anticipated. Daniel's presence altered the geometry of the room. He did not stand close to Jessica. He stood beside the tray where 2 stacks of paper rested, Michael's envelope and his own documents. The visual symmetry was not lost on him. 2 preparations, 2 intentions, only one, grounded in reality. Mr. Carter, Daniel said evenly, acknowledging Ethan first. "I appreciate you coming so quickly." Ethan nodded, still unsettled. "I wasn't aware of this trust." Daniel inclined his head slightly. "Few people were." Michael scoffed, attempting to reclaim tone. "This is absurd. You don't just walk into a hospital room and overturn a marriage." Daniel turned to him fully now. His voice remained calm, but something in it sharpened not anger, but precision. "I'm not here to overturn anything," he said. "I'm here to clarify what already exists." He opened his folder and removed a second document, laying it beside the first. He aligned the edges carefully, a small gesture that carried weight. Order mattered. This trust, Daniel continued, was established by Jessica's family decades ago. Its terms are specific. Its protections, intentional. It was designed to function precisely in moments like this, when emotions run high and assumptions fail. Linda stepped forward, voice tight. "If that were true, we would have known." Daniel met her gaze briefly. "The trust was designed so that you wouldn't." The words were not cruel, they were factual. Jessica said nothing. She did not watch the exchange closely. She knew what the document said. She had lived with their implications quietly for years. What mattered now was not persuasion, but process. Ethan cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said carefully, "if this trust is valid, and it appears to be, it changes the entire framework." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "It does." Michael shook his head. "You're exaggerating." Daniel did not respond immediately. He waited until Michael's words settled into the room, then spoke. "The trust holds primary assets totaling $2 billion, he said calmly. "Those assets are separate. They are not marital property. They are not subject to division." The number hung in the air. Ethan's face went still. Linda's breath caught audibly. Michael stared, disbelief giving way to something closer to panic. "That's impossible," Michael said. She never. "She never needed to," Daniel replied. He turned a page. "The trust also includes provisions regarding medical events, decision-making authority, and guardianship. In the event of childbirth, authority rests solely with the beneficiary, Jessica." Michael's voice rose slightly. "We're married." Daniel nodded. Marriage does not nullify a trust. The room seemed smaller now. Michael felt the ground shift beneath assumptions he had never questioned. "So what are you saying?" he asked more quietly than before. "I'm saying," Daniel replied, "that any attempt to assert control today, financially, legally, or otherwise, has no standing." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Michael," he said, "we need to reassess." Michael turned on him. "You said I said what I could based on what I knew," Ethan replied. "This changes everything." Silence followed, not awkward, not explosive, just final. Jessica adjusted her position slightly, wincing, as the movement reminded her of the hours she had just endured. The baby stirred, then settled again. She placed a hand gently over the small back, grounding herself in something real and present. Michael watched her, seeing her for the first time, not as a figure he could manage, but as someone who had been operating on an entirely different plane. He felt exposed, not because he had been challenged publicly, but because he had been wrong privately. Linda's voice cut through, strained. "You planned this." Jessica looked at her calmly. "I planned to be safe." The distinction mattered. Daniel gathered the documents he had laid out, stacking them neatly. "We can continue this discussion through appropriate legal channels," he said. "For now, Mrs. Brown needs rest." Dr. Moore stepped forward, grateful for the opportunity to restore order. "That's correct," she said. "Visiting time is over." Michael hesitated, then nodded stiffly. He glanced at the envelope he had brought, still unopened, its purpose now hollow. He reached for it, then stopped, leaving it where it was. As the room began to clear, Daniel remained briefly. He leaned closer to Jessica, his voice low. "Everything is in place," he said. "You don't need to do anything else." Jessica nodded. She felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that the outcome unfolding was not accidental. It was the result of years of restraint, of choosing preparation over confrontation. When the door closed behind Michael and Linda, the room felt lighter. Not because a battle had been won, but because a weight had been removed. Jessica closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitor and the soft breathing of her child. The lawyer outside the door had done his part. Now the consequences would follow slowly, methodically, exactly as the documents intended. The trust deed was not read aloud all at once. Daniel Wright understood that moments like this were not about spectacle. They were about sequence, about letting each fact land fully before introducing the next. So he did not begin with the number. He began with the structure. The trust, Daniel said, his voice even, was established to operate independently of marital status. Its terms are irrevocable. Michael Brown stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides. He listened, but not the way he had listened before, confident, impatient, already anticipating rebuttal. Now he listened as someone realizing that the conversation had moved beyond his reach. Ethan Carter remained near the tray, eyes scanning the document again, slower this time. He had stopped looking for loopholes. He was looking for limits. Daniel continued. "The beneficiary has exclusive authority over all trust assets. No spouse, no partner, no external party has standing to access, redirect, or claim them." Michael shook his head once sharply. "That's not how marriages work." Daniel met his gaze. "It is how trusts do." Jessica Brown remained silent. She did not need to correct anyone. The document had its own voice. Her role now was simply to allow it to speak. Daniel turned a page. The trust also specifies protections in the event of medical incapacity. During childbirth, the beneficiary's authority remains intact, regardless of condition, unless otherwise designated. Ethan exhaled slowly. So even if she were unconscious, she would still retain authority, Daniel confirmed. "Yes." Linda Brown pressed a hand to the back of a chair, steadying herself. "This is obscene," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. $2 billion. That can't be right. Daniel did not react to the word. He turned the page. The valuation, he said, was last updated 6 months ago. The total stands at approximately $2 billion. The number settled into the room like a physical presence. Michael felt his throat tighten. He tried to speak, but the words came out thin. "You expect us to believe she's been sitting on that kind of money?" This whole time, Daniel's response was immediate. "She hasn't been sitting on it. She's been protected by it." Jessica shifted slightly in the bed, the movement small but deliberate. She looked at Michael, then, not to explain, not to justify, but to acknowledge the moment. "I didn't hide anything," she said quietly. "I lived my life." Michael stared at her, searching for anger to respond to. There was none. Only calm. Only fact. Ethan closed the folder carefully. "Michael," he said, "this trust is airtight." "What about marital contributions?" Michael demanded. "What about shared life?" Daniel answered before Ethan could. Marital contributions were never commingled. That was intentional. Michael laughed once harshly. "So I never had a chance." Daniel's tone did not change. "You had every chance to ask." Silence followed. Not heavy, not charged, just undeniable. Dr. Moore glanced at the clock again. "Mrs. Brown needs rest," she said, firmer now. "This discussion is concluded for today." Daniel nodded. Of course. Michael felt the room turning away from him, not in judgment, but in procedure. There was no appeal to be made here, no argument that would undo what had already been written. He looked at the envelope he had brought. The paper felt flimsy now, insignificant. He realized that everything he had prepared assumed ignorance on Jessica's part, assumed dependency, assumed that silence meant weakness. He had been wrong on all counts. Linda stepped toward Jessica, her voice strained. "You could have told us." Jessica looked at her gently. "You never wanted to know." Daniel gathered the documents with care, returning them to his folder. "We'll proceed through formal channels," he said. "There's nothing further to address today." As the room began to clear, Michael lingered. He looked at Jessica one last time, searching for something, perhaps regret, perhaps triumph. He found neither. Jessica leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion finally settling in. She felt no rush of victory, only the quiet certainty that the truth once revealed did not need embellishment. The trust deed had done its work. And it was only the beginning. The bank records spoke without emotion. They did not accuse. They did not speculate. They simply existed, time-stamped, itemized, precise. Daniel Wright waited until the room had thinned, until Dr. Moore had confirmed that Jessica could rest, until the hum of medical equipment returned to its steady baseline. Then he opened a second folder. "These are supplemental," he said quietly, placing a thin stack of papers on the tray where the envelope had once sat. "They won't be read aloud unless necessary." Michael Brown watched from a few steps back, arms hanging loosely now, the posture of certainty replaced by something closer to vigilance. He recognized the layout instantly. Statements, transfers, internal memos. He felt the familiar irritation of numbers, except this time, they were not his to command. Ethan Carter leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he scanned the first page. "These are bank records," he said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Authorized disclosures." Michael's voice tightened. "Authorized by who?" Daniel glanced briefly at Jessica. "By the account holder." Jessica did not move. She did not look at the papers. She knew what they contained. She had known for weeks. What mattered was not exposure, but alignment facts placed where they belonged. Ethan flipped to the next page. His jaw set. "Michael." He said carefully, "These transfers, I know what they are," Michael interrupted. "They're temporary." Daniel let the interruption pass. He turned another page, aligning the stack again. "Temporary movements still leave records," he said. "Patterns, too." Ethan paused on a page, reading more slowly now. "These amounts," he said, "they were moved out, then returned days later." "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "On multiple occasions." Michael felt heat rise again. "That's not illegal?" Daniel nodded. "Not necessarily. The distinction mattered. These records," Daniel continued, "are not presented as allegations. They're presented as context." "For what?" Michael snapped. "For standing," Daniel replied. "And credibility." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Michael, some of these transfers coincide with representations you made." Michael turned to him sharply. "You said I said based on the information you provided," Ethan replied more firmly now. This wasn't disclosed. Silence stretched again, but this time it carried weight. Daniel slid one final document forward. "This is a notice," he said. "Issued earlier today." Michael stared at it. "Notice of what restriction?" Daniel answered. "Temporary." Ethan's eyes widened slightly as he read. "This freezes certain accounts," Daniel finished. "Pending review." Michael felt his breath catch. "You can't do that." Daniel's voice remained calm. "The trust can." Jessica shifted slightly, wincing, then settling again. She did not look at Michael. She focused on the slow, steady breathing of her child. The room felt quieter now, as if even sound had learned restraint. Ethan closed the document slowly. "Michael," he said, "this complicates things." Michael laughed, once hollow. "Complicates?" Daniel did not respond to the tone. "The review is standard," he said, "triggered by unusual activity and timing." "And the timing," Michael demanded. Daniel met his gaze. The timing coincides with a major life event. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly. He looked around the room as if searching for an ally. Linda was no longer there. The nurses had resumed their routines. Dr. Moore had retreated to the doorway, prepared to intervene, only if necessary. "This isn't fair," Michael said quietly. Daniel nodded once. "Fairness isn't the metric. Compliance is." Ethan gathered the papers, stacking them carefully. "We need to step back," he said to Michael. "Reassess." Michael turned toward Jessica, then his voice lower. "You planned this." Jessica looked at him calmly. "I prepared," she said. "There's a difference." He swallowed. "You could have warned me." "I did," she replied softly. "You didn't hear it." Daniel closed the folder. "From here," he said, "everything proceeds through formal channels. Communication will go through counsel." Michael nodded numbly. As Daniel prepared to leave, he paused beside the bed. "You don't need to think about any of this right now," he said to Jessica. "Rest." She nodded. She felt the exhaustion settle fully now, the kind that came after clarity, not confusion. The work had been done long before today. What remained would unfold at its own pace. Michael stood alone for a moment, longer staring at the space where authority had once felt certain. The bank records had not shamed him. They had simply removed the illusion that control could exist without consent. He turned and left without another word. The room returned once more to its original purpose. The legal table did not turn all at once. It shifted the way tectonic plates do, quietly beneath the surface, with consequences that only became visible after the movement had already happened. By the time Michael Brown realized the ground had moved, there was no way to step back onto what he thought was solid. Ethan Carter was the first to speak after the bank records were set aside. He cleared his throat, the sound unusually tentative. "Given the new information," he said carefully, "we need to reconsider the documents you presented." Michael stared at him. Reconsider how Ethan gestured toward the envelope Michael had brought into the room. Those papers were drafted under assumptions that no longer apply. Daniel Wright nodded once. Specifically, the assumption of financial dependency. "And authority," Ethan added almost reluctantly. Michael's jaw tightened. "We're still married." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "But marriage doesn't create standing where none exists." Jessica Brown remained quiet. She did not need to assert anything. Her presence alone grounded and still seemed to reframe the room. She was not asking for advantage. She was allowing the system to operate as designed. Ethan turned another page in his folder. Custody, he said, was framed with the expectation that Michael would be the primary provider. Daniel responded immediately. "The trust establishes Jessica's capacity to provide without reliance." Ethan nodded slowly, "which means the custody framework changes." Michael felt a familiar anger rise, but it had nowhere to land. There was no argument to win here. No one was accusing him. No one was even raising their voice. The process was simply continuing without him. Linda re-entered the room briefly, having stepped out earlier to make calls that went unanswered. She sensed the shift immediately. "What's happening?" she demanded. Ethan looked at her, then away. "We're adjusting what she pressed," Daniel answered. "Expectations." Linda scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She just gave birth. None of this should be happening." Daniel's voice remained level. "Then it shouldn't have been initiated here." The words landed without malice. Jessica finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't start this," she said. "I just didn't stop it." Linda looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You think this makes you strong?" Jessica met her gaze. "I think it makes me responsible." Ethan closed his folder. At this point, he said the documents presented by Michael are unenforceable. Michael turned sharply. "You can't just say that." Ethan met his eyes. "I can, and I am." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. Daniel added, "Any attempt to pursue those terms would fail under review." Michael felt something inside him give way, not dramatically, but definitively. He had come into the room believing he would dictate terms. He was leaving without leverage. Doctor, Moore stepped forward again. "This discussion is over," she said firmly. "Mrs. Brown needs rest." Daniel nodded, agreed. Ethan gathered his materials. He looked at Michael, his expression no longer confident. "We'll speak later," he said quietly. "Privately." Michael nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead, recalculating in ways that no longer made sense. As the room cleared, Jessica leaned back against the pillows. The baby slept soundly against her chest. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the steady sense that something fragile had been protected. Daniel remained for a moment. "The next steps will be handled," he said. "You won't need to engage directly." Jessica nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "You did exactly what you needed to." She closed her eyes briefly, letting the words pass without attachment. When Michael left, he did not look back. The legal table had turned, not because anyone flipped it, but because it had never been balanced to begin with. Silence followed Michael Brown out of the room. Not the awkward kind. Not the kind that begged to be filled. It was a working silence, intentional, controlled, restorative. The kind that allowed systems to reset themselves after strain. Jessica Brown lay back against the pillows, the hospital bed angled just enough to support her spine. Her body ached in layered ways she did not try to name. Physical exhaustion, yes, but also the deep fatigue that followed prolonged vigilance. The kind that came when a long-anticipated moment finally passed and left nothing else to brace against. The baby slept soundly against her chest, one small hand curled instinctively into the fabric of her gown. Jessica adjusted the blanket with care, her movements precise despite the tremor in her fingers. She had learned to trust precision when strength wavered. A nurse moved quietly around the room, checking vitals, recording numbers. No one spoke about what had just happened. The staff did not need to. They had seen enough life unravel and reassemble to know when to step back. Dr. Helen Moore returned briefly, her tone softened now that authority had been restored to its proper domain. "Everything looks stable," she said. "You should rest." Jessica nodded. "Thank you." When the door closed again, the room settled into a slower rhythm. Machines hummed. Lights dimmed slightly. The world narrowed to breath warmth and time. Daniel Wright returned later that evening alone. He did not bring documents. He did not bring updates. He brought confirmation. "They've acknowledged standing," he said quietly, standing near the foot of the bed. "There won't be any attempts to reassert control directly." Jessica did not ask who they were. She understood. Legal structures were already doing what they had been designed to do, absorb pressure without spectacle. "Good," she said simply. Daniel hesitated, then added, "Michael requested to speak with you." Jessica looked at him, then her expression calm, but unmistakably closed. "No." Daniel nodded. "That's what I told him." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. After he left, Jessica lay awake for a long time. Not because she was replaying the confrontation, but because she was finally allowing herself to stop anticipating it. The habit of readiness was difficult to release. She had lived in it for years without realizing how tightly it had wrapped around her. In the days that followed, the hospital became a place of routine rather than rupture. Paperwork arrived and was handled elsewhere. Visitors were screened. Linda Brown did not return. Michael did not call. Jessica did not wonder why. She focused instead on the small, grounding details of new life. Feeding schedules. The way her child's breathing changed when she held him closer. The quiet astonishment of watching a tiny chest rise and fall, steady and unburdened by the weight of adult assumptions. When discharge day arrived, Daniel was there again, not as an enforcer, but as a facilitator. He coordinated logistics with the efficiency of someone accustomed to minimizing friction. A car waited. Arrangements were already made. Michael did not appear. As Jessica was wheeled through the hospital corridor, she felt the strange sensation of movement without pursuit. No one tried to stop her. No one demanded explanations. The absence of interference felt almost unreal. Outside, the air was cool and bright. The world continued indifferent and intact. The legal processes that followed unfolded slowly, as they were meant to. Filings, reviews, confirmations. Jessica did not attend most of them. She did not need to. Her role had already been fulfilled. Occasionally, updates arrived through Daniel measured factual. Michael's attempts to challenge certain restrictions failed quietly. Linda's inquiries were redirected. Nothing escalated. Jessica did not read the updates immediately. She read them when she was rested when the baby slept. She treated information the way she always had, not as fuel for reaction, but as material for understanding. One afternoon, weeks later, Michael requested mediation. Daniel presented the request without commentary. Jessica listened, then shook her head gently. "There's nothing to mediate," she said. Daniel nodded. "I thought you might say that." She did not feel anger toward Michael. What she felt was distance, the kind that made conversation unnecessary. He had revealed his terms. She had declined them. The system had closed the rest. In moments of quiet, Jessica reflected on how little she had said throughout the entire process, how often she had allowed others to speak themselves into exposure, how restraint once mistaken for passivity had become clarity. She did not feel powerful. She felt aligned with her values, with the structures her parents had taught her to trust, with the understanding that dignity was not something to be defended loudly, but maintained consistently. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house settled into stillness, Jessica sat in the nursery rocking gently. The baby slept weight warm and reassuring against her. She thought about the delivery room, not with pain, but with perspective, about how easily humiliation could have taken root there, how different the outcome might have been if she had tried to argue, to explain, to persuade. She had done none of those things. Instead, she had let preparation speak. Silence, she realized, was not the absence of voice. It was the refusal to waste it. Jessica kissed the top of her child's head gently, a promise unspoken but firm. This was what strength looked like when it did not need to announce itself. Leaving the room did not feel like an exit. It felt like a return. Jessica Brown had imagined many versions of departure over the years, some abrupt, some dramatic, some negotiated down to the smallest detail. None of them resembled this. There were no raised voices in the hallway, no final looks meant to wound, no words that needed to be reclaimed later. There was only movement. A nurse adjusted the blanket around the baby with practiced gentleness. Another confirmed the discharge paperwork already signed and verified. The bed was rolled slowly toward the door, the wheels whispering against the polished floor. Jessica watched the ceiling lights pass overhead, evenly spaced, predictable. She appreciated their order. Daniel Wright walked alongside, not too close, not too far. He did not speak unless necessary. He understood that moments like this did not require commentary. They required space. As they reached the elevator, Jessica caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirrored doors. She looked smaller than she remembered, pale, tired. But there was something else there too, an absence of tension that had lived in her shoulders for years without her noticing. The elevator descended smoothly. No one else entered. The doors opened to the lobby where the day continued without pause. Phones rang, shoes clicked, conversations overlapped and dissolved. No one looked twice at her. That anonymity felt like mercy. Outside, the car waited exactly where Daniel said it would. The driver stepped forward, opening the door without hurry. The air was cool, clean. Jessica inhaled deeply, feeling the contrast between inside and out, the sterile order of the hospital giving way to the quiet unpredictability of the world. She settled into the back seat, the baby secured carefully beside her. Daniel closed the door gently, then stepped back. "I'll follow up later," he said, "when you're ready." Jessica nodded. "Thank you." It was not gratitude for the legal work alone. It was for understanding when to leave. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic with unremarkable ease. Jessica watched the hospital recede in the rearview mirror. She did not feel the urge to look back again. At home, Everything was prepared. Not lavishly, not ostentatiously, simply, deliberately. The nursery was quiet light, filtering through curtains that softened the afternoon sun. The crib stood ready. The chair by the window was positioned to catch the evening breeze. Nothing felt hurried. Nothing felt improvised. Jessica moved through the space, slowly letting her body reacquaint itself with its surroundings. The baby slept oblivious to the significance of arrival. She laid him down carefully, watching his chest rise and fall until her own breathing matched the rhythm. Only then did she sit. The silence of the house was different from the silence of the hospital. Less procedural, more personal. It held memory. It held possibility. Her phone remained untouched on the table beside her. Messages would come later. Updates, confirmations perhaps, attempts at contact. None of them required immediate response. For the first time in a long while, urgency did not dictate her actions. That evening, as light faded and shadows lengthened, Jessica prepared a simple meal she barely ate. She drank water. She took her medication. She did the small things that anchored her body in the present. Strength, she knew, was often maintained through routine. When night settled fully, she returned to the nursery. The baby stirred, then quieted at the sound of her voice. She rocked gently, humming something wordless, something her mother used to hum when answers were not yet ready. She thought briefly of Michael. Not with anger, not with regret, with distance. He belonged to a different chapter, one, defined by assumptions and missed questions. She did not feel responsible for what he had failed to understand. She did not feel triumphant either. The victory others might have expected, public acknowledgement, reversal of humiliation, visible consequence, had never interested her. What mattered was that the damage had been contained, that the future had been secured before it could be bargained away. In the days that followed, the world adjusted around her quietly. Deliveries arrived, groceries, supplies, a note from Daniel confirming that all filings had been acknowledged. No action required. Another note, days later, confirming the same. Jessica filed them away without ceremony. She spent her time learning the language of her child. The subtle distinctions between cries, the way his hands searched instinctively for contact, the way calm could be transmitted without words. Sometimes late at night, when the house was still and sleep was elusive, Jessica allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened, not as a replay, but as a recognition. How easily things could have gone differently. How little noise had been required to change everything. She did not feel fear. She felt resolve. One afternoon, a courier arrived with a package she'd been expecting. Inside were copies of finalized documents, clean stamped, complete. Jessica flipped through them, once verifying what she already knew. Then she placed them in a drawer she had prepared long ago. She did not lock it. That evening, as the sun set and the house settled again, Jessica sat by the window, the baby asleep against her chest. The world outside moved on, unaware and unconcerned. She watched it without urgency. Leaving the room had not been an act of escape. It had been an act of alignment, body intention, future moving in the same direction at last. There was no need to announce it. The distance spoke for itself. The aftermath did not arrive with sirens or headlines. It unfolded the way most lasting consequences do, quietly through correspondence, procedure, and time. Jessica Brown learned this not because she was surprised by it, but because she had lived long enough inside systems to understand how they preferred to work when left undisturbed. The first weeks passed in a blur of small routines. Feeding schedules, pediatric appointments, sleep fragmented into unfamiliar patterns. Jessica moved through these days with a kind of focused calm. Her attention narrowed to what mattered most. The larger world receded not because it had disappeared, but because it no longer demanded immediate response. Daniel Wright provided updates sparingly. When he did, his messages were concise, factual, free of speculation. A filing acknowledged. A request denied. A deadline extended. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Michael Brown attempted contact twice. The first message was brief, restrained. He asked to talk. Jessica read it once, then archived it. She did not feel compelled to respond. Silence, she had learned, was not avoidance. It was clarity. The second message came days later, longer this time. It carried a tone of injury, of disbelief that events had not unfolded as he expected. Jessica read it more carefully, not to analyze the emotion, but to confirm the absence of anything new. There was none. She did not reply. Linda Brown made inquiries through third parties, friends of friends, casual messages framed as concern. Daniel redirected them efficiently. Boundaries once established required maintenance, but not explanation. The legal process advanced steadily. A formal review of the accounts concluded as anticipated. Restrictions were lifted where appropriate and remained where warranted. No accusations were filed. No dramatic findings announced. The process did not exist to shame. It existed to stabilize. Michael's attempts to challenge the trust failed quietly. There were no courtroom scenes, no public confrontations. The documents held. The structure absorbed the pressure exactly as it had been designed to do. Jessica did not attend the hearings. She did not need to. In moments of quiet, she reflected on how different this was from the narratives people expected when power shifted. There was no applause, no vindication, no audience. There was only outcome. As weeks turned into months, Jessica settled more fully into her new life. She adjusted her schedule to the rhythms of her child. She took walks in the early morning when the world felt unclaimed. She reconnected with parts of herself that had been dormant, not ambitions, but steadiness. She did not change her lifestyle dramatically. The house remained modest. The routines remained simple. Wealth, she understood, did not require display to exist. One afternoon, Daniel asked if she wanted to issue a statement. "No," Jessica said without hesitation. He nodded. "That's what I thought." The absence of a statement became its own message. Michael's professional life began to show strain, though not in ways that attracted attention. Opportunities narrowed. Relationships cooled. Not because of scandal, but because uncertainty had entered spaces where confidence once reigned. He was forced to operate without the assumptions that had previously insulated him. Jessica did not follow these developments closely. They were not hers to manage. She focused instead on building something quieter and more durable. A home defined by predictability. A future defined by choice rather than reaction. Occasionally, memories of the delivery room surfaced not as trauma but as reference. A reminder of how quickly dignity could be threatened when people believed vulnerability granted permission. She held those memories without bitterness. They had taught her something valuable. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, Jessica found a notebook she had kept during her pregnancy. Pages of dated entries, observations, small details that had once felt necessary to record. She flipped through it slowly, recognizing the woman who had written them. She closed the notebook and placed it back in the box. She did not need it anymore. Daniel's final update arrived months later. "The trust is secure," his message read. "All matters concluded." Jessica read it once, then set her phone down. She did not feel relief. She felt confirmation. That night, she sat in the living room with her child asleep in her arms. The house was quiet. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the resolution that had taken place within its systems. Jessica watched the shadows shift as headlights passed by the window. She did not imagine alternate endings. She did not replay decisions. The outcome had been determined long before the delivery room. It had been shaped by years of restraint, of choosing not to escalate, of trusting preparation over confrontation. What followed was not a new beginning in the dramatic sense. It was a continuation, cleaner, clearer, unburdened. The aftermath had not been loud. It had been complete, power due. Jessica Brown learned rarely announced itself. It did not arrive with raised voices or decisive gestures meant to be witnessed. It did not require humiliation to prove its existence. The most enduring forms of power she had come to understand were quiet by necessity. They functioned best when they did not need to convince anyone they were real. In the months after everything had settled, Jessica's life did not expand outward. It narrowed inward, refining itself around what mattered. Her days were shaped by small constants, the weight of her child in her arms, the rhythm of morning light across the living room floor, the soft certainty that no one could take what had already been secured. She did not think of herself as victorious. Victory implied a contest, a visible opponent, a moment of triumph. What she had experienced was something else entirely. It was alignment, the moment when preparation met reality and held. Sometimes when she rocked her child late at night, Jessica allowed herself to consider the version of events Michael had believed in. The version where silence meant ignorance, where patience meant submission, where timing alone could create leverage. It was not difficult to imagine how convincing that version must have felt from the inside. But belief, she had learned, was not the same as truth. The delivery room had exposed that distinction with unforgiving clarity. In a space defined by vulnerability, Michael had mistaken opportunity for authority. He had assumed that physical exhaustion equaled incapacity, that public pressure equaled compliance. He had acted accordingly. Jessica had done nothing to stop him. She had not argued. She had not protested. She had not attempted to reclaim dignity through performance. She had simply allowed the structures already in place to speak. That she realized was the difference between control and power. Control demanded constant assertion. It relied on fear, on imbalance, on the belief that someone else could be diminished to sustain it. Power, by contrast, required patience. It existed whether it was acknowledged or not. It waited. In the weeks that followed, Jessica encountered subtle reminders of this truth. In conversations with doctors who deferred to her without question. In correspondence that addressed her directly without assumption. In the quiet way decisions were made around her rather than for her. She did not correct anyone's perception of her. She did not volunteer explanations. The urge to justify herself, to narrate her choices for the sake of being understood, had faded. Understanding, she knew, was optional. Outcome was not. Her child grew quickly each day, revealing a new detail she committed to memory, the way his expression changed just before sleep, the way his fingers curled around hers with unthinking trust. She watched him with a sense of responsibility deeper than fear. Everything she had done, every restraint she had practiced, had been in service of this, ensuring that his life began from a place of stability rather than negotiation. She thought often about what she would teach him someday. Not about money, not about power, but about preparation, about listening more than speaking, about knowing when silence was not surrender, but strategy. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood with a stroller, Jessica passed a group of people engaged in a loud disagreement. Voices rose, hands gestured, strangers slowed to watch. The scene felt strangely distant, like something she had once known how to participate in, but no longer needed. She walked on. Jessica did not rebuild her life as an act of defiance. She rebuilt it as an act of continuity. The same values that had guided her before, discipline, discretion, foresight, guided her still. The difference was that now nothing pushed against them. The past had resolved itself without her needing to punish it. That she realized was the most unexpected outcome of all. In moments of reflection, Jessica acknowledged that what had happened could easily be misunderstood by anyone looking for drama. From the outside, it might seem anticlimactic. There was no public reckoning, no reversal meant to satisfy an audience, no spectacle to confirm that justice had been served. But justice, she understood, was not designed to entertain. It was designed to hold, and it had held. The documents remained where they belonged. The boundaries remained intact. The future unfolded without interruption. Jessica did not need reminders of what she had survived. She lived inside the proof of it every day. As her child slept one evening, Jessica stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker on as dusk settled in. Somewhere beyond her view, lives intersected, conflicts escalated, assumptions went unchallenged. She felt no obligation to intervene. She had learned that leaving with dignity did not require closure from those who had misunderstood her. It required consistency with herself. Jessica turned away from the window and returned to the quiet work of living. No one applauded. No one needed to. There are moments in life when strength is misunderstood as silence and preparation is mistaken for passivity. This story reminds us that true power does not announce itself in anger or demand recognition or through noise. It works quietly, patiently, often unseen, until the moment it needs to stand. Jessica's journey is not about winning against someone else. It is about refusing to lose herself. She did not raise her voice when she was humiliated. She did not seek revenge when she had the upper hand. Instead, she trusted foresight, discipline, and the systems she had put in place long before she ever needed them. That kind of strength is rarely celebrated, but it is the kind that lasts. Life does not always give us the chance to argue from a position of comfort. Sometimes we are tired. Sometimes we are vulnerable. Sometimes we are surrounded by people who believe that our weakness gives them permission to decide for us. In those moments, what protects us is not what we say in the heat of the moment, but what we prepared in the quiet years before. This story teaches us that dignity is not loud. Justice does not have to be cruel. And walking away with grace can be more powerful than staying to prove a point. You don't need to explain yourself to people who never truly listened. You don't need to perform your pain to justify your boundaries. And you don't need to humiliate others to reclaim your own worth if this story resonated with you. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where have you been quiet out of wisdom rather than fear? Where have you prepared instead of reacting, and where might silence be your strength, not your weakness? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what this story meant to you. And where you're watching from, it's always powerful to see how stories connect across different places and lives. And if you're drawn to stories about quiet strength, legal justice, and dignity in the face of adversity, consider subscribing to the channel. More stories like this are waiting, and each one carries a reminder: real power doesn't shout. It endures.